Katie Martinez wiped the sweat from her face as she finished cleaning the last hallway on level 7. The space station Nexus Prime was huge, bigger than any city she had ever seen back on Earth. She had been working as a maid here for 6 months now, and she still got lost sometimes in the endless corridors. The station was the center of the Zephyrian Empire. Aliens from 17 different star systems came here to do business, make deals, and bow before Emperor Vexithara. Katie was one of only 50 humans allowed to work here. It was a good job, much better than the mining colonies where most humans ended up. As Katie pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway, she heard it again. The sound that had been keeping her awake for weeks. It was a low, sad noise that seemed to come from deep inside the station. The other human workers said it was just the air systems making noise, but Katie knew better. She had heard crying before, and this was definitely crying. The sound always started around midnight and went on until dawn. It was so full of pain that it made Katie's heart hurt just listening to it. She had tried to find where it was coming from, but the station was too big and the sound seemed to echo from everywhere at once. Katie finished her work and headed back to the human quarters. The hallways were darker now, lit only by the soft blue glow of the alien light strips. Most of the aliens were sleeping, though she wasn't sure if all aliens actually needed sleep. The Zephyrians looked like they were made of purple crystal, and she had never seen one with their eyes closed. She passed a group of tall, thin aliens with silver skin who were talking in quiet voices. They nodded politely to her as she went by. Most aliens treated the human workers well enough, though they clearly saw them as lesser beings. Katie didn't mind. She was grateful just to have a job that didn't involve digging rocks out of asteroids. As she walked, Katie thought about Emperor Vexithara. She had only seen him a few times, usually from far away during official ceremonies. He was much taller than other Zephyrians, maybe 10 feet high, with 4 arms and skin that looked like purple glass. When light hit him just right, you could see rainbow colors dancing inside his crystal body. The Emperor was said to own many treasures from across the galaxy, but his most prized possession was something called Piraxis. Katie had heard the other workers talking about it in whispers. They said it was a dragon. A real living dragon from the Emperor's homeworld. Most humans thought dragons were just stories, but apparently they were real in space. Katie reached her small room and got ready for bed. The human quarters were simple but clean, with real earth plants growing in small gardens to help with the air. She had a tiny window that looked out into space, where she could see stars and sometimes other ships flying by. Just as she was about to sleep, the crying started again. Katie sat up in her narrow bed and listened. The sound was definitely louder tonight, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere above her. She had never been to the upper levels of the station where the Emperor lived. Human workers were only allowed in certain areas, and the royal levels were completely off limits. But the crying was so sad that Katie couldn't ignore it anymore. She had always been the type of person who wanted to help when someone was in pain, even if it got her in trouble. Her mother had always said it was both her best and worst quality. Katie put on her work clothes and grabbed her cleaning supplies. If anyone stopped her, she would say she was doing extra work to earn more credits. It wasn't completely a lie. She did need the money to send back to her family on Earth. The elevator to the upper levels needed a special key card that Katie didn't have, but she had noticed that the maintenance shafts connected all the levels, and her cleaning cart was small enough to fit through most of them. It would be a tight squeeze, but she thought she could make it. Katie found a maintenance entrance and crawled inside with her cart. The metal tunnel was dark and cramped, and she had to push the cart in front of her as she crawled. The air was warmer here, and she could hear the humming of the station's power systems all around her. After what felt like hours, Katie found another entrance that led to a hallway she had never seen before. This level was much fancier than the areas where she usually worked. The walls were covered in smooth alien metal that seemed to glow with its own light, and strange symbols were carved into the ceiling. The crying was much louder here. Katie followed the sound down a long corridor lined with tall windows that looked out into space. She passed several doors that were sealed with complex lock systems, but the crying seemed to be coming from the end of the hall. At the end of the corridor was a massive door made of the same purple crystal as the Emperor's skin. Through the transparent material, Katie could see a huge room filled with floating crystal formations and artificial starlight, and in the center of it all was the most beautiful and terrifying creature she had ever seen. Paraxis was bigger than Katie had imagined. The dragon's body was easily 30 feet long, with scales that changed color from deep green to bright gold as it moved. Its wings were folded against its back, but Katie could tell they would be enormous when spread out. The creature's neck was long and elegant, ending in a head that was both fierce and intelligent. But what struck Katie most was the dragon's eyes. They were large and golden, filled with an intelligence that seemed almost human, and they were full of tears. As Katie watched through the crystal door, Paraxis lifted its great head and let out a sound that made her heart break. It was the crying she had been hearing every night, but hearing it directly from the source was almost too much to bear. The dragon was weeping streams of liquid light that fell like stars to the floor of its chamber. Katie pressed her hand against the crystal door, wishing she could somehow comfort the magnificent creature. As if sensing her presence, Paraxis turned its golden eyes toward her. For a moment, dragon and human looked at each other through the barrier, and Katie felt a connection she couldn't explain. Then footsteps echoed down the corridor behind her, and Katie knew she had to run. Katie barely made it back to her room before the night guards finished their rounds. Her heart was still racing from what she had seen. The image of Paraxis crying those streams of liquid starlight was burned into her memory. She couldn't stop thinking about the pain in those golden eyes. The next day, Katie went about her regular cleaning duties, but her mind kept wandering back to the dragon. She found herself cleaning the same spots over and over, while she thought about what she had witnessed. The other human workers noticed her distraction. "You okay, Katie?" asked Danny Collins, a maintenance worker from Texas. "You seem pretty out of it today." "Just tired," Katie replied, not wanting to explain where she had been the night before. She knew that if word got out that she had snuck into the royal levels, she would be sent to the mining colonies faster than she could blink. But as the day went on, Katie realized she had to go back. The memory of Paraxis's suffering was eating at her. She had never been able to ignore someone in pain, and apparently that included alien dragons. That night, Katie made her way back through the maintenance tunnels. This time she brought a small flashlight and some food from the human cafeteria. She wasn't sure if dragons ate human food, but it seemed wrong to visit empty-handed. When she reached the crystal door, Paraxis was in the same position as before, lying with its great head resting on the floor. But as soon as Katie appeared, the dragon lifted its head and looked directly at her. There was no surprise in those golden eyes, as if Paraxis had been waiting for her to return. Katie sat down on the floor in front of the door and spoke softly through the crystal. "Hey there. I'm Katie. I heard you crying last night, and I wanted to see if you were okay." Paraxis tilted its massive head, studying her with obvious intelligence. The dragon's eyes seemed to follow every movement Katie made, and she had the strange feeling that it understood every word she said. "I brought you some food," Katie continued, holding up an apple from her pocket. "I don't know if you eat fruit, but my mom always said food helps when you're sad." The dragon moved closer to the crystal door, bringing its huge head down to Katie's level. Up close, she could see that Paraxis's scales weren't just green and gold, but held every color of the rainbow when the light hit them right. The creature was even more beautiful than she had first thought. Katie placed her hand on the crystal door, and Paraxis gently touched its snout to the same spot on the other side. The crystal was warm under her palm, and for a moment Katie felt something that made her gasp. It was like a whisper in her mind, not words but feelings. Loneliness, sadness, and something else. Hope. From that night on, Katie visited Paraxis every evening after her work was done. She would sit by the crystal door and talk about her day, her family back on Earth, and anything else that came to mind. The dragon always listened, sometimes making soft rumbling sounds that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Katie learned that Paraxis understood human speech perfectly. When she asked yes or no questions, the dragon would nod or shake its great head. When she told funny stories about the other human workers, she could swear she saw amusement in those golden eyes. She also noticed that Paraxis was growing stronger. When Katie first saw the dragon, it had barely lifted its head. Now it moved around its chamber more, sometimes stretching its wings or walking to the large windows that looked out into space. The change didn't go unnoticed by others. Katie overheard two Zephyrian guards talking about how the Emperor's dragon seemed more alert during the day. Emperor Vexithara himself had apparently commented that Paraxis was eating better and showing more interest in its surroundings. This made Katie nervous. If the Emperor started paying more attention to his dragon, he might discover that someone had been visiting it. But she couldn't bring herself to stay away. Piraxis needed her, and she had never been able to abandon someone who needed help. One evening, Katie brought a small music player with songs from Earth. She had saved up her credits to buy it, thinking that music might help comfort the dragon. As the soft melodies filled the air, Piraxis closed its eyes and seemed to relax for the first time since Katie had known it. "Do you like music?" Katie asked. The dragon nodded slowly, its expression peaceful. Katie began bringing different types of music each night. She discovered that Piraxis loved classical pieces with lots of strings, but seemed confused by rock music. The dragon's favorite was a lullaby that Katie's mother used to sing to her, and Katie found herself humming it during her daytime work. Was this humming that got her in trouble? Katie was cleaning near the dragon's chamber during her regular shift when she started humming the lullaby without thinking. She was focused on scrubbing the floor when a deep voice behind her made her freeze. "That is an interesting melody. Where did you learn it?" Katie turned around to find Emperor Vexithera standing in the hallway, his forearms folded across his chest. Up close, he was even more impressive than from a distance. His purple crystal skin seemed to glow with inner light, and his eyes were like deep purple gems. "It's just an old Earth song, Your Majesty," Katie said, dropping into the bow she had been taught when she first arrived at the station. "Stand up," the Emperor commanded. "You are the human who cleans this area?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "My name is Katie Martinez." Emperor Vexithara studied her for a long moment. "My dragon has been behaving strangely lately. More energetic, more alert. The guards say it sometimes looks toward this corridor as if waiting for something." Katie's heart was pounding, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "I wouldn't know anything about that, Your Majesty. I only clean the outer areas." The Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed, tell me, Katie Martinez, what do you know about dragons?" "Nothing, Your Majesty. We don't have them on Earth." "No, you do not." The Emperor was quiet for a moment, and Katie could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "But you seem to have an effect on mine. Piraxis has not shown this much life in decades." Before Katie could respond, the Emperor turned and walked away, his crystal footsteps echoing down the hallway. Katie stood there shaking, wondering if she had just gotten herself fired or worse. That night, Katie almost didn't visit Piraxis. She was scared that the Emperor might be watching, might have set some kind of trap. But when midnight came and she heard the familiar crying start up again, she knew she couldn't stay away. When she reached the crystal door, Piraxis was waiting for her as always. But this time the dragon seemed agitated. It paced back and forth in its chamber, occasionally looking toward other parts of the room as if expecting someone else to appear. "What's wrong?" Katie asked softly. Piraxis approached the door and pressed its snout against the crystal where Katie's hand rested. This time, the feeling that passed between them was stronger and clearer. Images flashed through Katie's mind. The Emperor, but younger somehow, standing beside Piraxis under an alien sky. The two of them flying through space together, surrounded by stars. And then darkness, pain, and the terrible sense of something being torn apart. Katie gasped and pulled her hand back. "You and the Emperor! You were connected somehow, weren't you?" Piraxis nodded slowly, its golden eyes filled with ancient sadness. "What happened?" Katie whispered. But before Piraxis could respond in whatever way it could, footsteps echoed down the corridor. This time Katie recognized the sound of crystal feet on metal floors. Emperor Vexithera was coming. Katie pressed herself against the wall as Emperor Vexithera's footsteps grew closer. Her heart was beating so loud she was sure the Emperor could hear it. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the hallway was completely empty except for the smooth walls and tall windows. The footsteps stopped just around the corner. Katie held her breath and waited. After what felt like forever, she heard the Emperor walking away in the opposite direction. She let out a shaky breath and looked back at Piraxis through the crystal door. The dragon was watching her with what looked like concern in its golden eyes. It made a soft sound, almost like a whisper that somehow made Katie feel calmer. She pressed her hand against the door one more time before hurrying back to her room through the maintenance tunnels. The next few days were tense for Katie. She kept expecting to be called into Commander Ryan Blake's office and told she was being sent to the mining colonies. Blake was the human officer in charge of all the human workers on the station, and Katie had heard he didn't tolerate rule-breaking. But nobody came for her. Katie went about her regular cleaning duties, though she noticed more guards than usual patrolling the upper levels. She also noticed that Emperor Vexithera seemed to be spending more time near Paraxis's chamber during the day. Katie didn't dare visit the dragon for 3 nights, but on the 4th night the crying was so loud and painful that she couldn't stand it anymore. She made her way through the tunnels again, being extra careful to listen for guards. When she reached the crystal door, Paraxis looked terrible. The dragon's scales had lost their bright colors and looked dull and gray. Its great head hung low, and the streams of liquid starlight falling from its eyes were brighter than ever. "Oh no," Katie whispered. "What happened to you?" Paraxis lifted its head when it heard her voice, and some of the color returned to its scales. The dragon approached the door slowly, as if it was having trouble moving. Katie placed both hands on the crystal door. "I'm sorry I stayed away. I was scared the Emperor would catch me." This time, when Paraxis touched its snout to the door, the connection between them was stronger than it had ever been. Instead of just feelings and quick images, Katie found herself experiencing actual memories that belonged to the dragon. She saw Paraxis as a young dragon, much smaller but still magnificent, living on a world where purple crystal trees grew as tall as mountains. The sky was filled with 3 suns that cast rainbow shadows across crystal valleys. Then she saw a young Zephyrian, tall and strong with skin that sparkled like diamonds. This was Emperor Vexithara, but he looked completely different. His forearms moved with grace instead of stiffness, and his purple eyes held warmth and joy instead of cold authority. In the memory, young Vexithara approached Paraxis with open hands and an open heart. When their minds touched for the first time, light exploded around them. Their consciousness merged into something greater than either could be alone. They could fly between stars without ships, communicate without words, and share each other's thoughts and feelings completely. Katie saw them soaring through space together, their combined will, allowing them to travel faster than any spacecraft. They visited distant worlds, helped solve conflicts between different alien species, and brought peace to troubled systems. They were partners in every sense of the word, 2 souls that had become one. But then the memories turned dark. Katie saw a terrible war against creatures made of living shadow called the Void Wraiths. These beings fed on light and life itself, leaving only empty darkness behind. They had already destroyed 7 star systems when Emperor Vexithera and Paraxis joined the fight against them. The battle was fierce beyond anything Katie could imagine. Paraxis breathed streams of starfire while Vexithera channeled the power of entire suns through his crystal body. Together, they were winning against the shadow creatures. Then something went wrong. The Void Wraiths had a weapon that Katie couldn't fully understand, something that attacked the mind instead of the body. It hit both Vexithera and Paraxis at the same time, sending waves of psychic pain through their shared consciousness. Katie felt the moment when their bond shattered. It was like watching someone's heart break, but 1,000 times worse. The connection that had made them one being was torn apart, leaving both Emperor and Dragon wounded in ways that couldn't be healed with medicine. When the memory ended, Katie found herself crying. She understood now why Paraxis wept every night. The dragon wasn't just sad, it was mourning the loss of its other half. "He doesn't remember, does he?" Katie asked softly. "The Emperor doesn't remember what you meant to each other." Paraxis shook its great head sadly. The weapon had damaged Vexithara's memory of their bond, leaving him unable to understand why he felt so empty inside. Instead of seeing Paraxis as his partner, he now saw the dragon as just another possession to be kept and displayed. Katie wiped her eyes and pressed her forehead against the crystal door. There has to be a way to fix this. There has to be a way to help you remember together. But even as she said it, Katie knew it wouldn't be easy. The Emperor had built walls around his heart to protect himself from the pain of his damaged memories. And Paraxis had been locked away for so long that most people had forgotten dragons could be anything more than beautiful pets. Over the next few weeks, Katie spent every free moment she could find researching in the station's library. The Zephyrian archives were mostly closed to humans, but she found some old texts that had been translated into Earth languages. She learned that starfire dragons like Paraxis were incredibly rare, and the bond between dragon and rider was considered one of the most sacred relationships in the galaxy. The text called it the Starfire Key, though they weren't clear about whether this was an actual object or something else entirely. Katie also discovered that the Void wraiths had been completely destroyed in the war 50 years ago, but the psychic weapons they used had left many survivors with damaged minds and broken spirits. Most never recovered from their injuries. The more Katie learned, the more hopeless the situation seemed. How could a human maid possibly heal wounds that had defied the best doctors and scientists in the galaxy? But Katie refused to give up. Every night she visited Paraxis and shared what she had learned. The dragon seemed to grow stronger just from having someone who understood its pain. And Katie began to notice small changes in the Emperor as well. Vexithera was spending more time near Paraxis's chamber, sometimes standing at the windows and staring out into space for hours. The guards reported that he had started asking questions about dragon care and behavior, something he hadn't done in decades. Then one evening, Katie overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. She was cleaning near the command center when she heard Commander Blake talking to a group of Zephyrian officers. They were discussing the growing threat from the Helix Federation, a neighboring government that had been expanding into Zephyrian territory. The Emperor's Council wants to use the dragon as a weapon, Blake was saying. They think Paraxis could single-handedly destroy the Federation fleet. But can it still fight? Asked one of the Zephyrian officers. The creature has seemed weak for years. That's why they're talking about using the old enhancement machines, Blake replied. Force the dragon into a battle state whether it wants to fight or not. Katie's hands tightened on her cleaning cloth. She had read about the enhancement machines in the archives. They were ancient Zephyrian devices that could temporarily boost a creature's abilities, but using them on an unwilling subject often resulted in permanent damage or death. As Katie hurried away before she could be caught eavesdropping, she realized that time was running out. If the Emperor's Council forced Paraxis into battle, the dragon might not survive, and if Paraxis died, any chance of restoring the Starfire bond would die with it. That night, Katie made a decision that would change everything. She was done being careful and done hiding in the shadows. If she was going to save Paraxis, she would need to take a much bigger risk. She was going to try to restore the Starfire bond herself. Katie knew her plan was dangerous, maybe even impossible. She was just a human maid with no special powers or training. But she had learned something important from her weeks of research and her growing connection with Paraxis. The Starfire Key wasn't a magical object or ancient machine. It was something much simpler and much more powerful. It was trust. Every night for the past month, Katie had sat by the crystal door and listened to Paraxis's pain. She had shared her own stories, her fears about her family back on Earth and her hopes for the future. In return, the dragon had shown her memories and feelings that no one else had seen in 50 years. They had built a bridge of understanding between them, and Katie believed that bridge might be strong enough to reach Emperor Vexithera as well. But first, she needed to get inside Paraxis's chamber. Katie spent 2 days watching the guard schedules and studying the lock system on the crystal door. The lock was designed for Zephyrian hands with 4 separate panels that needed to be pressed at the same time. It seemed impossible for a human with only 2 hands to open. Then Katie remembered something from the archives. Ancient Zephyrian locks weren't just about physical keys. They also responded to mental patterns and emotional states. The dragons themselves had never needed locks because they shared consciousness with their riders. On the 3rd night, Katie made her move. She waited until the guards had passed on their rounds, then approached the crystal door. Paraxis was waiting for her as always, but this time the dragon seemed more alert, as if it sensed something different about the night. Katie placed both hands on the lock panels and closed her eyes. Instead of trying to force the mechanism open, she reached out with her mind the same way she had been connecting with Paraxis. She thought about trust, about friendship, about the desperate need to help someone she cared about. The crystal door began to glow with soft blue light. The lock panels warmed under Katie's hands, and she heard a gentle clicking sound as the mechanism recognized something it hadn't felt in decades. The door slid open with barely a whisper. Katie stepped into Paraxis's chamber for the first time, and the dragon's head came down to her level. Up close, Paraxis was even more magnificent than Katie had imagined. The dragon's scales reflected the artificial starlight like living jewels, and its golden eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever. "Hello?" Katie whispered, reaching out to touch the dragon's snout with her bare hand. The connection that had been building between them for weeks suddenly exploded into something much stronger. Katie gasped as Paraxis's consciousness touched hers directly, without the crystal barrier between them. She could feel the dragon's thoughts, its memories, and most importantly, its love for the Emperor who had forgotten their bond. But Katie also felt something else flowing through the connection. Power. Real, cosmic power that made her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. Golden light began to surround both her and Paraxis, growing brighter with each passing second. Katie realized what was happening. By opening her heart completely to Paraxis, by offering the dragon the trust and understanding it had been missing for 50 years, she had awakened a partial starfire bond. Not the complete connection that had once existed between Paraxis and Vexithera, but something new and unique. Through this new bond, Katie could see and feel things she had never imagined. She experienced what it was like to fly between stars, to feel the solar wind beneath her wings, and to touch the thoughts of other living beings across vast distances. For a moment, she understood what the universe looked like through a dragon's eyes. But more importantly, she could see Emperor Vexithara as Paraxis saw him, not the cold, distant ruler that everyone else knew, but the wounded soul underneath. The Emperor's crystal body was scarred with invisible damage from the psychic weapon that had shattered his bond with Paraxis. His memories of their connection had been buried so deep that he couldn't access them anymore. Katie also saw the terrible loneliness that ate at Vexithara every day. He didn't understand why he felt so empty inside, why ruling an empire couldn't fill the hole in his heart. He had convinced himself that power and control were enough, but Paraxis could see through that lie. The golden light surrounding Katie and Paraxis grew so bright that it could be seen through the chamber windows. Alarms began to sound throughout the royal levels of the station, and Katie heard the sound of running feet in the corridors outside. "They're coming," Katie said to Paraxis, though she realized she didn't need to speak anymore. The dragon could hear her thoughts directly now. Paraxis nodded and moved to stand protectively over Katie. The dragon's presence in her mind felt warm and reassuring, like having a loving parent watching over her. But Katie could also feel Paraxis's fear. If the guards found them like this, connected by the starfire bond, there was no telling what the Emperor might do. The chamber door burst open and Emperor Vexithara strode in, followed by 6 guards with energy weapons. The Emperor's crystal skin was flashing with angry red light and his forearms were clenched into fists. "What is the meaning of this?" Vexithara demanded, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. Katie stood up slowly, still glowing with golden starfire energy. She felt Paraxis's strength flowing through her, giving her courage she had never known she possessed. "Your Majesty," Katie said, her voice carrying strange harmonics that seemed to come from the dragon as well as herself. "I'm trying to heal what was broken." Emperor Vexithara stared at her in shock. The golden light surrounding Katie was exactly the same color as the energy that had once flowed between him and Paraxis during their bond. He had buried the memory so deep that he had forgotten it existed, but seeing it again triggered something in his damaged mind. "Impossible," the Emperor whispered. "Humans cannot form the starfire bond. It is forbidden by the laws of nature itself." "Maybe," Katie replied, still glowing with dragon fire. But someone forgot to tell Paraxis that. The dragon stepped forward, moving closer to its old partner for the first time in 50 years. Paraxis's scales were blazing with their original colors now, bright gold and emerald green that seemed to contain the light of distant stars. Katie felt the dragon's emotions flowing through their bond. Love, hope, and desperate longing all mixed together. Paraxis had never stopped believing that someday, somehow, Vexithara would remember what they had meant to each other. The Emperor took a step backward, his crystal skin flickering between red anger and purple confusion. "Stay back," he commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Katie could see through Paraxis's eyes that Vexithara was fighting an internal battle. Part of him wanted to run away from the painful memories that were trying to surface, but another part, buried deep beneath decades of emotional walls, was crying out for the connection he had lost. "You're afraid," Katie said gently, the starfire making her voice carry across the chamber like music. "You're afraid of being hurt again. But Paraxis never stopped loving you, Your Majesty, not for a single day in 50 years. The Emperor's crystal form began to shake, I don't remember, he said, and for the first time since Katie had known him, he sounded vulnerable instead of powerful. I don't remember what we were. Katie reached out with her mind, using the connection she shared with Paraxis to touch the Emperor's damaged consciousness. It was like trying to heal a broken window with her bare hands. But she had to try. Then let us help you remember, she said. The golden light around Katie and Paraxis reached out toward Emperor Vexithera like gentle fingers of starfire, offering to bridge the gap between past and present, between pain and healing. The Emperor stood frozen, caught between fear and hope, while the entire fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. Emperor Vexithera stood in the doorway of the chamber, his crystal body trembling as the golden starfire reached toward him. Katie could feel his terror through the connection she shared with Paraxis. He was afraid of the pain, afraid of remembering what he had lost, afraid of opening his heart only to have it broken again. But Katie could also feel something else stirring in the Emperor's damaged mind. Deep beneath the walls he had built around his memories, the love he had once shared with Paraxis was still alive. It was buried and wounded, but it had never truly died. I can't, Vexithera whispered, backing away from the starfire. If I let myself feel what we had and then lose it again. You won't lose it, Katie said, her voice gentle but filled with the strength of the dragon bond. Love isn't something that can be destroyed by weapons or wars. It can be hidden, it can be damaged, but it never really goes away. Paraxis made a soft sound, almost like a song, that filled the crystal chamber with beautiful music. The dragon's golden eyes were fixed on its old partner, filled with patience and hope that had lasted 50 years. Katie felt the dragon's memories flowing through their connection, and she shared them with the Emperor without his permission. She showed him the first day they had met, when a young prince and a young dragon had touched minds and discovered they were meant to be together. She showed him their flights between the stars, their adventures on distant worlds, and the perfect joy of two souls united as one. Emperor Vexithera cried out as the memories hit him. His crystal skin flashed from red to purple to brilliant white as his damaged mind tried to process what it was seeing. The walls he had built around his heart began to crack and crumble. I remember, he gasped, falling to his knees. I remember flying with you among the 7 moons of Altair. I remember the way your thoughts felt in my mind, like coming home after a long journey. Paraxis moved closer, its great head lowering to the Emperor's level. The dragon's eyes were streaming liquid starlight, but these were tears of joy instead of sorrow. Katie felt the moment when something shifted in the Emperor's mind. The psychic damage from the Void Wraith weapon was still there, but it no longer controlled him. The love he felt for Paraxis was stronger than any weapon, and it burned away the barriers that had kept them apart. Vexithera reached out with all 4 of his hands and touched Paraxis's massive head. The moment their skin made contact, the chamber exploded with light. The true starfire bond ignited like a newborn star. Golden energy poured from both Emperor and dragon, swirling around them in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Katie felt herself being gently pushed out of the connection as something much older and more powerful took its place. She watched in wonder as Vexithera and Paraxis rose into the air together, their consciousness merging into the perfect unity they had once shared. The Emperor's crystal body blazed with inner light, and the dragon's scales became so bright they looked like pieces of captured sunlight. For a moment, Katie could feel what they were experiencing. It was like being 2 separate notes that suddenly discovered they were part of the same song. Every thought, every emotion, every memory was shared between them. They were still 2 individuals, but they were also something greater, something that could touch the very fabric of space and time. The energy from their reunion spread beyond the chamber, flowing through the station's crystal structure and out into the void of space. Every living being within 1,000 miles felt it, a wave of pure joy and completion that reminded them of their own capacity for love. On the bridge of the station, Admiral Helen Carter, the human military advisor, stared at her instruments in amazement. The energy readings are off the charts, she reported to Commander Blake. Whatever's happening up there, it's generating more power than our main reactor. Blake nodded grimly. And the Helix Federation fleet? They're retreating, Carter said in disbelief. All 12 ships are pulling back from the border. It's like they felt something that scared them. In the dragon's chamber, Emperor Vexithera and Paraxis slowly descended back to the floor, still glowing with starfire but no longer blazing like a sun. They looked at each other with eyes that held 50 years of separation and pain, but also the unbreakable love that had survived it all. "My friend," Vexithara said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "My partner. How did I ever forget?" Paraxis made a rumbling sound that Katie felt as much as heard. It was the dragon's way of saying that forgetting wasn't important anymore. What mattered was that they had found each other again. The Emperor turned to Katie, who was still glowing with a faint golden light from her brief connection to the starfire bond. "You did this," he said. "You brought us back together when no one else could." "How?" Katie thought about her answer carefully. "I think it's because I'm human," she said finally. "We're not the strongest or the smartest species in the galaxy, but we're good at connecting with others. We're good at understanding pain and helping to heal it." Vexithara nodded slowly. The Starfire Key was never an object or a weapon. It was the ability to open one's heart completely to another being, to trust without reservation, to love without fear of loss. "And humans are naturally good at that," Paraxis added, speaking directly into Katie's mind with a voice like distant thunder. The Emperor's crystal skin shifted to a warm purple color that Katie had never seen before. "Katie Martinez," he said formally, "I name you the first human ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire. Your people have shown us something we had forgotten about ourselves." Katie felt overwhelmed by the honor, but also by the responsibility. "Your Majesty, I'm just a maid. I don't know anything about diplomacy or politics." "You know about the most important thing of all," Vexithara replied. "You know how to see the best in others, even when they have forgotten it themselves." Over the following weeks, everything changed on Nexus Prime. The Helix Federation, having felt the power of the restored Starfire bond, sent ambassadors instead of warships. They had realized that fighting the Zephyrian Empire was no longer an option, and they were curious about the humans who had somehow brought peace to the galaxy. Katie found herself in a position she had never imagined, helping to negotiate trade agreements and cultural exchanges between species that had been enemies for generations. Her natural empathy and her experience with Paraxis made her uniquely qualified to understand the fears and hopes of different alien races. Emperor Vexithara, reunited with his dragon partner, became a different kind of ruler. Instead of governing through fear and power, he led with wisdom and compassion. The cold, distant emperor that Katie had first known was replaced by someone who remembered what it meant to truly connect with others. Paraxis was happier than it had been in 50 years. The dragon spent its days flying through space with the Emperor, visiting distant worlds and helping to solve conflicts through understanding rather than force. The night crying had stopped completely, replaced by songs of joy that could be heard across star systems. But Katie's favorite moments were the quiet evenings when she would visit the dragon's chamber, not as a secret anymore but as an honored friend. She would sit with Vexithara and Paraxis and listen to their stories of the worlds they had visited and the people they had helped. "Do you ever regret it?" the Emperor asked her one evening as they watched the stars through the crystal windows. "Giving up your simple life as a maid to become an ambassador?" Katie thought about her family back on Earth, who were now proud of their daughter's achievements instead of worrying about her survival. She thought about the human workers on the station, who no longer had to fear being sent to mining colonies because humans were now valued partners in the Empire. She thought about the countless beings across the galaxy who were living in peace because one human girl had refused to ignore someone else's pain. "No," Katie said with a smile. "I think this is what I was always meant to do." Sometimes the most important keys are the ones that unlock other people's hearts. Paraxis rumbled in agreement, its golden eyes reflecting the starlight outside. The dragon had learned something important from its connection with Katie, something that all the beings in the galaxy were slowly beginning to understand. The greatest strength wasn't in weapons or technology or magic. It was in the simple ability to see another being's pain and choose to help heal it, even when it meant taking a risk. That was the real Starfire Key, and it had been inside Katie Martinez all along.